Okay. Again, good afternoon, and thank you. Welcome all of you for being here. We look forward to hearing a presentation regarding RASE. I would imagine that the esteemed Mayor William A. Johnson, Jr. will be presenting. And you're joined by your colleagues who we may all know, but if you want to introduce yourselves, that's fine too.
Sure, I'll introduce myself. This is Arlene Santiago. I had the honor of serving on the commission as one of the co-chairs along with Bill.
Well,
Mayor Johnson?
our staff support is not speaking up, but we're happy to have Dr. Archie, Dr. Lucas, and Deputy County Executive Crosdale, who have joined us. And actually, Arlene Santiago is going to open up with the presentation. I'll follow her. We want to leave ample time for questions. So we'll give you a very thorough but superficial overview of the report and hopefully target in on any specifics that you have through your questions. So let me turn it over to Arlene Santiago.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for inviting us to share elements of the RASE report with you today and for taking the time to engage on the report. As you are all aware, the report is about 280 pages long. So as Bill just mentioned, we won't be going over every recommendation in the report, but we hope to leave you committed to developing and implementing strategies to address the recommendations included in the report. As we've repeated multiple times since I think December or January, the report was never intended to be the end game, but rather the beginning of this process for change. And without the next steps, really the work of that report will not go anywhere. So again, thank you for having us and for hearing us today. With that, as a reminder, I get the easy part. I get to just give you, once again, the high level overview of how the commission was structured. The commission was chartered to assess current laws and regulations and policies that impact institutional and structural biases, racism, and inequities, and to provide recommendations to improve and bring change to our current state. Undeniably, once we began our work, we quickly realized that many issues cut across institutional and geographic lines and affect many sectors beyond the reach of government. However, we did not shy away from those, but instead recognized that there would be a need for collaboration in order to move the work forward. With respect to our specific work, the commission was organized around 9 working groups, each led by 2 or 3 of the 21 appointed commissioners. In fact, 2 members of this esteemed council, council members Lightfoot and Gruber, dedicated countless hours to the Business Development and Human and Social Services Working Group as they led those groups. The commission was made up of 21 commissioners, as I just said, 9 working groups, which included about 160 community volunteers. And they were tasked with delivering on community engagement. Obviously, through the pandemic, they were very creative in the ways to get that community engagement, and it ran the gamut from doing surveys to doing virtual town halls through Facebook or otherwise, doing interviews, and in the case of council member Lightfoot's group, they went on an actual tour and stopped in and visited small business owners. In addition to that, each working group was tasked with data and information sharing. So not only did they rely and look at data from official government sources, but they also got input from local community sources, including Common Ground Health and others, in order to help their assessments of the situation for our community itself. And then once they completed both the community engagement piece and the data sharing piece, they went into the last piece, which is really identifying priorities and recommendations for each of the working groups. Coming out of that, that was fed back into the commission. And with those prioritized recommendations, as we evaluated, we recognized that there were common themes coming out of the working groups. And then ultimately in the report, you will also see that there are buckets of proposed solutions. I'm not going to go into any details with those because those are going to be covered by Mayor Johnson in the next steps. But overall, that was the general approach in terms of the process. If you look in the document itself, in the report, for each theme section, you'll see key issues, you'll see the policies at play, you'll see the connections to local laws, as well as the suggested actions and responses. And those appear generally between the pages 31 and 56. If you're interested in seeing the work from the working groups themselves, those start after page 70. We thought it was important for the community and for all the volunteers that made this report possible to see the actual work that was done by each of the working groups. So that is part of the report itself. So Bill, I'll hand it back to you for the next few pieces.
Thank you, Arlene. Let me say to Council President Scott and your colleagues, when we got this assignment and we were told we had 6 months to do it, I don't think any of us really could imagine the magnitude of this work. And the fact that it has come together so coherently is really, I think, an indication of how hard we had our staff helping us, our consultant. We had some college interns and the volunteers themselves. Our biggest chore was we had all of these recommendations, all so important. We had one group, for example, that had 13 priority recommendations. And it really took a tremendous amount of effort on their part to distill that list down to 3. They felt, and the other groups and Councilman Lightfoot and Gruber can speak to this point, because I know that on Councilman Gruber's point, they had a large number of items that they all felt were extremely important. So the way we reconcile this was by saying that we're going to carefully index this report. We're going to organize it in a way that people don't have to read all 283 pages. That we will be very careful in the way we summarize it in the overview, but we will also speak clearly to the recommendations, and they will be sitting in one place. And if people need to really get an understanding of how these groups arrive at their decisions about what to include, what to rank, and what to essentially put in what we call the parking lot, not to be ignored or forgotten, but just to be dealt with at a later time, then of course they could see all of that. And I believe that there was a sense of small comfort when we kept reassuring our commissioners that their work was not going to disappear. All right. The second thing that really drove us was to produce something that could be clearly digested by the community and that could be embraced by the community. So we paid careful attention to how these recommendations were stated. They were stated in action terms, and they were left open to a process that will be described later as to ownership, who takes ownership for what, how do these items get done. That is extremely important, because I'm certain that each of you who's sitting in this meeting have been engaged like I have in so many activities where a lot of energy is put forth, a lot of creativity, a lot of dedication, and then nothing happens as a result. And we're all determined that we want to make sure that the implementation phase of this work is just as important as the creation phase of this work. We're not going to be satisfied that we got this nice bulky document. It's got a beautiful cover on the front. It's printed in type size that even people like me with fading vision can read. So we're not going to be content with the aesthetics of this report. We really want to get to the urgent need for action. So that's where we are, and I wanted to really stress that point. We, after we did our work, we became clear that there were these systemic issues that had to be really not merely focused on, but had to be carefully explained. What is structural racism? Most people can identify individual acts of racism. They can talk about group acts of racism. But when you look at systems where things seem to be in order, you know, this is the way things have been done. Nobody can question that. You can't go back and look at a history and point back to where there was some kind of racist intent when these practices and policies were put into place. But now all of a sudden, you begin to focus on the outcome and you see all these glaring disparities. How come it is that people of one or two racial groups tend to be on the disadvantaged side of the equation? And how is it people in primarily one racial group always end up on the advantage side of the equation? So we really do spend time really trying to identify and drill down on the systemic nature. And my belief is this, and I'm not saying everybody on the commission accepted this belief, but after being engaged in this work over a number of decades, my belief is this: if we can get beyond the guilt phase, if we can get beyond the finger pointing phase, and we can get beyond saying to people, can you see the disparity? Can you explain it? Is there any logical way you can explain this disparity? And if you can't explain it, then you've got to agree that it has to change. And I say in so many instances, this is what this work has begun. The whole question of mental health. All right. Now, Daniel Prude's case focused our attention on mental health, but there was a larger narrative that came out. How many people get properly served by the mental health system? And it is a factor of resources. Well, first, you can say people don't have insurance. They get short shrift. It remains to be seen whether that's going to be a conclusion that comes out of what happened to Daniel Prude at the University of Rochester Medical Center. Because clearly he was a man in distress. His family sent him there to be treated, not to be superficially examined and then sent back home. Is it a question of access? In other words, why don't we have more community-based mental health facilities? That is an issue that is addressed in this report. We look at so many other services where people who are senior citizens, and it's another economic issue, but why is it that there are better access to senior services in suburban communities than in the city of Rochester? Not because the city doesn't want to provide them, but there's so many demand on city resources. So the question then becomes, how do we expand access to resources? The whole question of cultural competency came across in almost every group, that people need to be better oriented, if that's the right word, trained, so that they can deal with communities of color, be more sensitive, recognize more patterns and address them. So this whole question of training and retraining workforces in order to have them better prepared. I will say, and when you look at the whole of this report and you see, and we actually repeat things, the whole question about interconnectivity is a repetition, but it is also a focus, because it says if you find a problem with, you look at the whole question of employment, and you say that the lack of employment is a driver or an outcome of poverty. How do you open up access to jobs? Who is one, or where are some of the most obvious places of employment? The public sector. But you can't just get a job in the public sector. You have to go through the civil service process in order to get a job. That system needs to be examined. So it's not only when we were looking at how do we better reform the police department, but we look at the whole larger question of jobs, how they are created. And with the resources they have created, should there be a way to restructure our employment system? So these, I'm sort of giving you this kind of an overview. And let me just say, and again, I think we can respond to specific questions. And the last point I want to make has to do with the whole question of implementation and accountability. Now, it goes back to the desire that we're not going to just create a report that's going to collect dust, that is not going to get the attention that it is desired. So on pages 68 and 69, we speak very clearly to an implementation strategy. We set forth 4 clear areas of the follow-up that needs to occur with these recommendations. There are opportunities that can be immediately seized upon, okay? There are other opportunities that can be done outside of the public sector. That work needs to be organized. And I think that our staff will talk to the process that they have been engaged in for the last 6 or 8 weeks to bring this kind of work to fruition. The implementation is not only important, it leads to accountability, because we believe that we should regularly, the city and the county should regularly report back to the community and say, here's what has been accomplished, and attribute it to RASE. Monday, the county executive held a press conference, and he announced that effective January 1st, 2022, the minimum wage for Monroe County employees would be $15 per hour. This is the 3rd recommendation in our report, this notion. But we didn't just say it ought to be the city and the county. There needs to be a broader movement to incorporate the $15 standard across the board. But when the county executive made that announcement, he brought the leaders of the RASE Commission, and he brought the leaders of our MAPI to that event, and he directly connected his recommendation, his work, with the work of these 2 entities. We need to continuously inform the community of when these kinds of actions will occur. The mayor has recommended a $1 million allocation. I haven't seen the details of it yet, but when she released her budget proposal to you and sent it to you last week, she had included a $1 million allocation for implementation of the RASE recommendations. Council President Scott will remember this, and I don't want you to think she's as old as I am, but she's a few years younger. When she was a commissioner of DHR, wasn't DHR, Youth and Recreation. That name has changed so many times. She was actively, as part of my senior management team in our Rochester 2010 process. And one of the things that came out of that work was we actually began to incorporate specific recommendations from the 2010 process into the city budget. And this is based on citizen input and the like. But we did something further. Every time we implemented one of those projects, every time one was completed, we erected a public sign, and we said, and the community could have a better understanding of what Rochester 2010 was all about, because there was a sign there that said, this is a result of campaign number 5 in the Rochester 2010 report. I'm only citing that to say we need to embrace the same approach now going forward with RASE. When part of your money is being spent on a particular project, you should publicly proclaim, this is a result of the RASE Commission. So now people won't doubt that there's nothing that came of this report. They will have visual, concrete evidence that some things are coming from this report. And so I just want you to understand here that the excitement that we have is seeing something that come together in a tangible way. And I will say that many of the commissioners, because they were all working in kind of like silos, they were doing their working groups, and they were putting together their documents to be incorporated. None of us saw the final report in its full context until it was actually printed. Because I don't know about you, I can't get a sense of a document by reading it on a computer screen. I have no sense of the depth of it, the length of it. I just know it's a lot of words. So we saw this, and it has fallen together in such a logical, cogent, and coherent way, easy for people to focus on, and in my opinion, to take ownership. So let me just cite very, very quickly some of the recommendations where we know things are happening on. I mentioned the mental health. Mental health, because of the Prude case, became a very active, proactive group. The county, which has a $40 million annual mental health budget, immediately convened a working group of all practitioners, people in the field, and members of the RASE Commission to come up with different approaches. The city did the same thing, taking the intervention teams, changing it from the police department, putting it in another structure, and strengthening it, training people. So that kind of work really was running concurrently with our work. There was this is kind of an interesting one to cite. In the education area, recognizing that we have autonomous school districts, there's been all kinds of efforts in the past to talk about how do we regionalize, how do we come up with a countywide school. This is not going to happen under existing New York state law. They talked about introducing anti-racist curriculum in suburban schools and city schools as well. Well, I don't know if you paid attention to it, and it just got very slight mention. But in the suburban school board elections that were just held this past Tuesday, there were candidates for suburban school districts who were running on either what they call critical race theory approach, how to incorporate the elements of anti-race curriculum into their curriculum. There were people who supported it, who favored it, and who campaigned on it. I don't think they actually picked that up from our report, but it is an important element of our report. And there were people who ran against it. And I just saw a story in today's DNC that's trying to identify which factions won where. And there were clear gains in some communities, and there were clear losses. I mentioned the $15 an hour. Let me say that the MWBE, the Minority and Women Business Enterprise, we talk about a capital formation fund. And that's not something that the city and the county really has the resources to fully implement. So we've already reached out to the private sector, to the financial community, and work will be getting on that. Councilman Lightfoot has already been advised that this work taken under the leadership of ESL, the CEO of ESL, Fahim Masood, has agreed that he will actually begin this process of bringing people together, not people to talk about it, but people with the resources. And we want to bring into that group the beneficiaries, the people who will benefit from this new capital formation fund. So that kind of work. So there are things, and I will say that right today, and I haven't participated in the UCLM's discussion on police reform, but there are major recommendations about police reform in our report. And I'm really looking forward. I'm meeting with Chief Harriet Sullivan next week. I'm really looking forward to understanding how much of these recommendations can the RPD, is it willing to begin work on? I believe that the city council will have a tremendous amount to say about that, as will other entities like the Police Accountability Board. But there are these things. I see a lot of energy in this community, and I just wanted to just sort of focus on those. And I'm looking at my watch. I think I've talked long enough. Let me stop. And I will ask the staff, Dr. Archie, Dr. Lucas, Deputy County Executive Crosdale, if they will explain to you the process that happened right after this report was publicized around March 15th?
I would leave it to Dr. Archie and Dr. Lucas. They've been on our front lines and putting together information that we're going to use towards implementation on both the city and county side in partnership.
Dr. Lucas?
So Bill,
Yeah,
I'll start it off if I could. So first
Go
off,
ahead.
Dr. Lucas, thank you. I want to first off acknowledge our chairs for their extraordinary work that they put into this. Our chairs were our true steady rocks throughout this process, and the staff wants to make sure that we publicly commend them for their effort. We would also like to publicly recognize all of the commissioners who had all of their day-to-day operational jobs and their functions that they had to complete. And yet during a 6-month time frame, they were committed to doing this work. And so keep in mind, this was extraordinary circumstance during the middle of a pandemic, during the middle of public demonstrations and responses to things that happened both locally and nationally. And so we as the staff could not begin to communicate how grateful we are for the collaborative work of both the city and the county, but most importantly, our community and our chairs. So we wish to say thank you humbly as we can. And follow up to many of the things that Mayor Johnson hit the nail on the head. It's important that we take this work very seriously. And as the staff for the city of Rochester, my sort of counterpart is Dr. Lucas, and we have been very busy over the last month trying to really develop first step strategies for how to bring to life the work that the commission has charged us to do. And so with that, we have sort of these 4 overarching sort of values, if you would, and it's transparency, fidelity, accountability, and sustainability. At the core of all of these 4 values, we do these things collaboratively and collectively. Although the work of the principal owners of the work were both the mayor and the county exec, the report is truly for the people. And so we have committed to saying that we wish to make sure that every step that we put forward collaborates with the community so that it is all of our work, just not only the 2 principals that charged it to be done. So with that, we've been working very vehemently and quickly to try to get some organization of the report. As highlighted, there's sort of a principal review, which is phase 1 that we've been in for the last almost month now. And the focus of that principal review is to sort of get some organization and some structure to what is presented in the recommendations, to determine some ownership, whether it's internal and external, both to the city and the county, to take some assessment, which means to look at each recommendation to see what are we doing and do we have the feasibility and do we have the actual needs to actually sustain that recommendation. We wanted to look at also our timeline, not the timeline only for completion, but the timeline specific to sequence. So when you have all of these recommendations that are critically vital to all of these 9 working groups, it's important that you structure the response of how we are going to attain each of them in an order that says this one must go first, as to not actually become a barrier to another one that's incrementally needed. And so it's the timeline to complete it, but it's also the sequence and the order of how to complete them as well. And then as mentioned by Mayor Johnson as well, what are the resources that we need and actually to accomplish these things? And so literally we are grateful to look at the mayor's recent announcement for the proposal of funding that needs to be tied to how we are doing these things. And so it's that specific initial principal review that we're looking at. For an example, one of the things that we've asked each of the internal structures of the city and the county is to determine whether or not the recommendations, doing a step-by-step thorough review of every recommendation that's included with the priorities of looking at the things that are the key issues that are highlighted by the commission itself. Are these things that we have in place now, or are these things that would be totally new? And so even taking it a deeper dive, saying, if you say we are doing these things currently, then there's an additional step that we'd like you to consider. So first off, have you done a program evaluation or an evaluation period since you say it currently exists to determine if it's effective in its current state? Because to say that it exists currently, but not provide the data to say, is this effective and if it's working, means that we have not done our due diligence in our values. So and if they said, yes, we're in the middle of doing a program evaluation and we're learning that it needs to be effective and we need to tweak it, then are we changing it? But then also, are we establishing a communications plan? Because if the community said they weren't even aware that it existed, then how are we communicating that these resources, these services, which are critical to closing the gaps that have been identified in our charge, which is amongst racial and structural equity, how are we not communicating effectively to the community that these things are in place? And it's us being willing to take that deeper dive to really look into where we are now, what are the resources and needs to capitalize on them coming to fruition, how effective are those strategies in their current state, and then allocating the resources that are pivotal to making sure that we are having these things not only be done now, but sustainable. So these efforts are being looked at both within the city and the county respectively, and then they're being looked at amongst the two structures collaboratively, recognizing that even within the recommendations that are included, there are specific things that are allocated to you as city council that are specifically identified as recommendations that you are asked to lead. There are also recommendations that are specifically asked of county legislator, where they themselves are being asked to lead. But then there are those greater opportunities where we are going to need the full support of both city council and county ledge to both get behind certain recommendations to really drive the things at the state that we may need your collaborative approach to say these things must change. And so that's why in this earlier stage, it is our responsibility as staff to do that organization and to say, so what needs to be done first and who is that first stakeholder? We're also looking at that secondary phase, which is what community stakeholders will we be asking to take the lead role in helping to facilitate some of these efforts that are recommendations of the plan. And really being critical with saying, not only will the city internally need resources, but our community members who we're asking to lead these efforts may also need resources. And that's where my discussions earlier with the mayor were very critical with saying, if we're going to really take this seriously, we're going to need the resources to do it. So that's where the proposal of the funding came in place, so that we can't just place this as another item or another wonderful report that we shelve on a bookshelf, but we really begin to look into it in a thorough, deeply way to be very concise with how we are structuring these things to happen. And so this principal review phase is concluding now. And sort of our next phase that we're going into will be that sort of community phase, which is looking at the report and saying, what areas will we be needing our community members to take the lead, so that it could be very clear that although the work is, as I said, established and charged by the principal owners, that this work does not sit in a silo exclusively amongst the city or the county specifically. Dr. Lucas, did you want to, I know that there are specific things you wanted to add to our next steps, and I'll yield to you at this time.
Well, I think you did a great job of outlining that, Dr. Archie. The only thing I want to underscore is that both the mayor and the county executive took this report very seriously. Immediately upon getting it, they charged their leadership teams, as Dr. Archie just said, with reviewing the report fully and looking at the recommendations and completing a matrix that asked, who would be the owners of specific recommendations, what resources would be needed, what authorization level is needed to pull a recommendation through. Is it the mayor and the county exec? Is it a department head? Is it legislature? And also whether this was a short-term, medium-term, or long-term goal. There are a number of recommendations that we've termed as the low-hanging fruit. For example, Mayor Johnson spoke about the $15 an hour recommendation. That was a short-term goal. We could get that done within a year. As you heard, it'll be active January 2022. But then there's some other recommendations that are going to take some time, some planning, some collaboration, some strategy, and they may take beyond 3 to 5 years. So we want to make sure that this is visible and transparent to the community, that not everything is going to get done immediately, although we would love to see all of these things changed tomorrow. We know that that's not possible. So we want this to be as transparent to the community as possible. Who's going to own the recommendation, who has the responsibility for it, and how long it's going to take. Additionally, we want this to be owned by the community. This was a community report. We had hundreds of community members that were participating as work group members, doing surveys, in multiple ways, attending town halls and what have you. And we want this to be owned by the community so that it does not just sit on the shelf. And so we know that some of these recommendations will be taken up by community entities. And we are happy about that and we encourage that. So that will also be part of the second phase of bringing in those community entities to make sure that this is coordinated and this goes beyond just what the mayor and the county executive can do, because we know that they cannot do it all and they cannot do it alone.
One of the things to add to that is that sort of transparency and accountability piece, which are sort of the values that we highlighted earlier. And so as a result of this, we are going to be having benchmarkable, trackable data where people can go online and see where we are with respect to how we are measuring up to attaining the things that they recommended per the report. And so we are developing in relation to our IT areas a dashboard so that per recommendation, people can go to the RASE webpage and actually see per recommendation where we are as a status update, so that annually and quarterly, we are reporting out and providing updates to the community on how we are addressing these things to make sure that we are doing them transparently. The last thing that I'll say is that what we do know is that the RACE Commission report told us what needed to be done. And we receive it and we hear it loud and clear. And so as the personnel behind the scenes, it is the responsibility of the staff to confirm that we are also researching best practices on how to do what the RACE report has stated they wish for us to attain. And so we are working alongside and engaging such national organizations such as the Governmental Alliance on Racial Equity, who has high impact practices, not just based off of things that they want, but we are clearly specifically giving them what our community has stated they wish to happen. And so allowing them to give us sort of tools of best practices of how nationally those things have been done efficiently that are aligning with what we say we wish to have done. And so again, it's making sure that we are doing our due diligence as staff, Deputy County Exec Crossdale, Dr. Lucas, Commissioner Talia Wright, and myself are in absolute support and alignment with the guidance that has been established by the chairs to make sure that we are holding ourselves accountable to really facilitating and orchestrating a structure that gets these things to be done successfully. Bill?
Let me quickly add, Council President, before you open it up, on the last point, in terms of ownership, I think it's important that the private sector and the not-for-profit sector and the educational sector, all of these different sectors should be spending some time now looking at this report and identifying where they think they can be of the most assistance so they can come into this process. I feel very strongly about the capital issue for minority businesses. I see Councilman Lightfoot is on the call now. They went to businesses and they found out 2 or 3 major issues. One, first, this whole question of MWBE certification was an onerous process, and many of them just didn't have the time to even go for it. Therefore, they just left money on the table. The second thing is they didn't qualify easily for traditional sources of funding. They can't go to the bank. They don't have the track record to go to the bank and get the kind of capital they need to build strong, viable businesses that not just provide an opportunity to the owner, but which they can expand to provide employment to members of the community. That's a very important issue for me. I spoke to the people and say, at the banking level, bring these people together and start talking about how do you create a special fund, create the requirements, and more importantly, get the money to put into the fund. But there's a role for government because we need to really begin to lobby the state to change some of these onerous MWBE requirements. So it's not that just one sector or all, there's a real comprehensive process for doing the kind of work that's coming out of this. And I just cite that as one example.
Can I ask a question, Madam President, because I have to get off in a minute?
Councilmember Gruber has first place on this, and then you, Councilmember Evans.
All right, thanks.
Thanks, President Scott, and thanks everyone for the presentation. It was a pleasure to be on the commission. I miss seeing you every day. Well, it seemed like every day, Mayor Johnson. But want to thank the staff. I can't give enough credit for Dr. Archie, Dr. Lucas, Deputy County Executive Crosdale, and I also want to thank CGR, who I think did a tremendous job too as the contractor on this. I really enjoyed my time working on, I was just for frame of reference for other council members, we all kind of focus in on very particular work. I did all of my work related to sanctions at the county level, which I think, by the way, when some of that work ultimately does get translated, it's going to have a huge impact on our constituents and the people of this community. Dollars that right now are not being given to folks that if we tweak some things could actually be coming back into the community. Very excited about being able to work on some of those things. I just had a question for for Bill and for Arlene, specifically around this $1 million that Dr. Archie mentioned, and I appreciate the plan that you just laid out. But to Bill and Arlene, I mean, I was very surprised to see $1 million allocated from the mayor's proposed budget for this work. I'm wondering, what do you two see off the bat as opportunities, or how would you want to see us kind of move forward with that?
I'll say very quickly, I haven't seen the details of it. When I read about it, I was happy to see it because it's going to take a commitment, and we hope that the county will put up some money as well. But I wouldn't just put the money up there. I use it to incentivize getting more money. I would try to leverage that $1 million in 2 and 3 and 4 times, particularly from various sectors. I also don't think, Mitch, and you and I talk about issues like this, that it ought to just be a casual thing. It needs really some input from people. Where does this money get the biggest bang? Okay, $1 million ain't a lot of money, but it can achieve a significant impact. I think that hopefully through your process, as you're approving this budget, you will examine and you bring ideas to this process. I know Councilman Lightfoot has some ideas. He'd like to use the whole $1 million. But I just think that you as a council need to really zero in on how this money can be multiplied and achieve a much greater impact than the $1 million standing by itself. Arlene, you want to add something to that as a person with the money?
No, I'm not sure what that means, but anyway, I completely agree. I think that's the opportunity in front of us, right? And the other thing I would add is that to the extent that we identify areas or issues that we want to address specifically, not to reinvent the wheel, right? If we have people that we can collaborate with in our community who are doing this good work out there, let's use that relationship to build it further, because that will also help us, increase the magnitude and how to leverage the dollars that are here. But we really need to make sure that we're not creating just something additional, that to the extent we can collaborate with, be it nonprofits that are in a community that are doing some of this work, let's make sure we do that.
Thanks. And can I, without putting a last question, President Scott, without putting anyone from the county on, on the spot with any particular commitments or anything, I'm assuming that there have been talks about some dollars somehow, some way. Would that be in next year's budget, or is there already something that you all are working from?
So, Mitch, thank you for that question. Yeah, when we look at the RACE report and the other activities that have occurred in our community over the last few years, it really have focused on a lot of the issues that came out of the RACE report. We're looking at how we invest differently. So as many of you know, with the American Recovery Act dollars, this community between the county and the city alone, we're looking at close to $400 million. So we're looking a little more broadly about investment holistically. The $1.5 million that it took to do the increase in minimum wage for county employees, we're anticipating that come January, we extended that to all contractors who work with the county, that they also have to pay a minimum of $15 an hour. We're anticipating that that's going to cost additional money to the county as they put their budget together. And we're more than willing to make that same investment in partnership with a lot of our community providers. The city and the county right now are partnering to invest $39 million, not in just rental assistance, but how we deliver that service. So we'll be looking for more opportunities like that. And we currently have an RFP out to the point of the RASE Commission. And we've heard this for probably the 2.5 decades that I've been working in government, the delivery of services through our social services department. We're looking at reimagining that, and not just how we speak to people, how people engage with our services, but we are completely committed to integrating those services into the community, very similar to what we've done with the EPI program. And that process will probably cost us close to $4 million. So it's not, a singular approach to how we look at this, but how we look at how we invest the dollars going forward and really pushing towards real sustainable change. And I'll just add one other component to that. If there's ways that we can change county charter, and again, in partnership with the city, looking at the charter in the cities, if there's anything that we can do to attach that to some of the initiatives that we're pushing forward, so that we know we're not all going to be warming these seats forever, so that whatever we put together can't be easily undone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Evans? Where's he gone? He may have signed off on the call. Are there any other questions or comments?
I just, Madam President, I have a comment.
Certainly.
Okay, I just want to thank again the chairs as well and the staff. I too, as Councilmember Gruber has shared with you guys, I enjoyed the work that we did. We did a lot of work on this commission. Many nights, many hours of time was spent. And of course, many of us who were put in and gave our time to this work were concerned about the implementation of the ideas, and we've heard it spoken before by others in the staff, that this would not become something that would just sit on someone's shelf. With that being said, and I don't know if I missed the first portion of your presentation, I'm not quite sure that I am fully understanding of the next steps in the implementation process going forward. And so one of the things I did shortly after the report came out is I wrote a letter that I share with my colleagues and that I sent to the county executive and to the mayor, basically asking for them to create, I don't know, it doesn't have to be an extension of the current 21-member board. It could be a subgroup of that board to work on continually working towards implementation with timelines, addressing it to the budget. Now that we actually have some dollars actually attached, it actually could be more obtainable and easier to be able to attach it to the 1 million. You could start there with either using it as leverage, as former Mayor Bill Johnson has said, to leverage other dollars to be matched or to be a part of the process of implementation, and also prioritizing, as you are doing, what particular recommendations should be first. And so with that being said, also in that letter, it asks for a ongoing reporting to the community process, whether it be via the Race Commission website, the city website, or a hybrid of both, and constant updating to the community with some of the things similar to what Mayor Bill Johnson has said about, the billboards going up and ways that he identified uses of programs, initiatives, and or policy, practice, and procedures that have been changed through the Race Commission recommendations through the community reporting, and how we're tracking that, and then how we're evaluating the progress. So I think it's imperative, it's important that there is some kind of implementation a very clear implementation process. There's a little blurb on the Rochester Business Journal that came out, but it's not very clear. And it should be very clear in my opinion, I would encourage my colleagues to support me in this, that of the implementation of not only this report, but any report, whether it's Executive 203 or whether it's this race report, that the implementation process has to be just as clear as the recommendations. And I would like to hear from either Dr. Cephas and or Dr. Lucas on, what are their thoughts around the whole implementation, evaluation, and reporting process from the Race Commission with the two bodies of city and county, and what could that look like? And I have not received a response by the mayor and or by the county executive to my letter.
Well, first off,
Dr. Archie, go ahead.
okay,
I'll let you start.
Okay, thanks. First off, Councilman Lightfoot, I appreciate the inquiry, and I apologize if you had not gotten clear sort of updates on the progress. So you do have my apology for that as the City of Rochester staff member. You are absolutely correct. We want to make sure that we are providing clear, accurate benchmarks along the way of the immediately, but as well as the long-term strategies and plan for what this looks like. This very first sort of phase that we're in now is that we're looking at multiple things of the report. So getting it organized and getting it structured, which means instead of us, and I'm gonna break it down for you in a way that I think could be helpful. Instead of us going to say, it's that third bullet on page 201, if you go down, we have to organize it so that every one of the recommendations has an allocated identifiable label, so that when we begin assigning them, we can be able to track where and who that actual recommendation is being led by. We're actually putting things in place, as we stated, to look at who per recommendation will be the internal and or external stakeholders that will be taking the lead on providing us updates, tracking what are the immediate steps and long-term plans for that. And so again, that goes back to that organization and structural component. It's taking an inventory in the first step to say, of these recommendations that are provided that are listed as key priorities, are there any of these things that are currently in place now? And if our individual stakeholders say that they are, then that's a bigger question to say, then why is it that our community may not be aware of it, number one, and or number two, how we did an evaluation on it to see if it's actually effective or not. So that we are doing that internal look at what we have in place now that can really begin to say we've laid down a foundational structure that can be built upon. The next thing that we talked about is sort of the timeline of how long it will take per recommendation for each recommendation to be completed. But not only the completion timeline, but the sequence of that timeline, wanting to make sure that if we're completing this recommendation, that we're not actually serving as a barrier by doing it first, that may come and ultimately make harmful for other recommendations in the future. So it's looking at the priority and the sequence of how we're going to attain these things. And then, as we heard in the last step that we talked about, which I agree with, is what are the resources that we need in place that could consider how we're going to implement each of these recommendations. As highlighted as one of the things that we're doing to remain transparent and really open to the community about every recommendation is that we are developing an online dashboard per each one of the recommendations listed within the RACE report that will be quarterly benchmarked to let the community know per that recommendation what progress is being made, so that it is tracked and transparent along that progress, so that we are making sure that internally first we want to get the structure down so that going forward we can be able to build, track, benchmark, hold ourselves firstly accountable, and partner with our external community stakeholders to really bring it to fruition as we need to. So that's where the first step that we have really been digging teeth into the report to really get to the point of let's go, let's benchmark, let's work. Dr. Lucas?
Well said, Dr. Archie. We have been hearing this, questions from the community often about, what is next and how is this going to be implemented and what are the accountability measures going to be? And that is what we've been paying, the most attention to. We want to make sure that when these recommendations are implemented, they are implemented with fidelity. The county executive has spoken to this to make sure that we are really looking at the recommendations and doing what the community is asking us to do to make sure that we're dismantling the inequities and making the changes that the community is looking for. we want to make sure that there is accountability brought into this so that, again, you know who is working on what and where they are in the process, making sure that it's transparent and making sure that whatever changes are made are sustainable over time. And I think Deputy County Executive Crosdale said that regardless of who's in the seat, we don't want any changes to be easily undone. So the implementation is going to, we want to be thoughtful about it and methodical about it. We understand that there are steps to take. We don't just want to jump in without fully understanding what each of the recommendations is going to take, as Dr. Archie just laid out. So you will be seeing a thought out implementation plan, which is what you are speaking to. You will be seeing that within the coming weeks.
And just to add,
Can I quickly jump in here because I know we're running out of time, but I really want to emphatically underscore the concern that Councilman Lightfoot has articulated, and to say that we took care to address this in a very simplistic way. We, on page 68 of the report, we set forth 4 steps that should be followed in terms of implementation. One of which was that the mayor and the county executive should appoint a successor body to the RASE Commission. They can construct it in any way they see fit. They may decide to have some commissioners on it. I don't think it should be a huge body, and they bring fresh thought into it. They should have a body which is authorized to follow up on these recommendations and to report back to the community. It's been 2 months. We submitted our report on March 13th. I haven't seen any discussion about that body yet. And, you know, I love process, but not at the expense of progress. All right. And we shouldn't be over bureaucratizing this thing and come up with all of these fancy dashboards and all that kind of stuff. What people really want to see is results. What you said could be done. Has it been done? Let's don't complicate it. And I'm not saying this in any critical way because I have just tremendous, and this is not going to be a love in here, but I have tremendous respect for this staff and the hard work that we wouldn't have this report without them. And I have learned how to sublimate my own priorities when I listen to them and they say, we should do it this way. But I'm just saying we need to pay attention to giving the community a strong sign that this work is not collecting dust. It's not collecting dust. It's 2 months since we turned in this report, all right? And so Councilman Lightfoot has made this point clear to you all. I want to say we made it clear on page 68. Here's the way we can proceed to implement. And I think I would hate for us to be having this conversation 2 months from now about we got to get the process right.
All right, so we're on that note. I appreciate this. We're going to wrap it up. I have to jump on another meeting. President Scott had to leave. Did anyone? Is there anything pressing that anyone had to get out before we get ready to close? I wanted to thank our former mayor Bill Johnson. I want to thank Dr. Safik. I don't know if he's here, and Miss Arlene Santiago, as well as Dr. Cephas and Dr. Candace Lucas, as well as Deputy County Executive Corinda, and all of the staff, including our staff as well, and all of the council members who've joined us this evening to talk about this very, very, very critical report that, again, a lot of blood, sweat, and tears have gone into, and there's a lot of expectations. I have a lot of, I'm optimistic, and I believe that we're going to reach the goal here. And I look forward, as well as I'm sure my colleagues do, look forward of seeing this implementation plan, a very clear, concise, simple plan that can be understood from Main Street to downtown, you know what I mean, to Jefferson Avenue, to Clinton, or wherever, that can be understood by our residents and clear and concise. I look forward to seeing this, and I would tell you that we're looking very closely at this, and we're not going to let up, and that's not a threat. That's just a commitment of our collaboration and our partnership and our duty to do our due diligence on our end to make sure that we deliver on what this community, the community that is. Now, the Race Commission was made up of commissioners from the community, and it was also established and put together by many members of this community. And it is our obligation, our responsibility, and our desire to make sure that we deliver on what this community has put forth. So I want to thank you guys for the presentation. And again, we look forward to getting this implementation plan, and we look forward to seeing it being launched publicly to the community as well. So with that, I bid you all a good evening. God bless you, and until we see you again. Blessings.